Good morning, I'm Tamara Shoemaker. I had planned to get into 1 Corinthians chapter 13 today, better known as the love chapter, but the Lord led me somewhere else this morning, so I'm going to get back to that tomorrow or, the next day, whenever He takes me back to that. Full disclosure, I was just talking to a friend the other day about how I felt like the enemy was attacking me on 4 fronts: church, school, job, family, the 4 places where I'm most vulnerable. And we kind of were talking about how am I going to weather the storm? I have turned to 2 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 20 more often in the last few months than I've ever done before in the 41 years of my life. In this passage, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, is under attack from 2 nations, Moab and Ammon. And Jehoshaphat is a theocratic king who actually, reveres the Lord. And he prays. He prays. How many times have I heard the phrase, well, the only thing I can do is pray? And it's like it's a last resort, like it's a fallback, like we've exhausted our whole arsenal of things that we can do. And so when all those possibilities fall through, the only thing we've got left is to pray, is to mutter some words heavenward in hopes that something's going to stick, right? Prayer isn't all we've got. It's what we've got. It's the first thing we've got. So remember in 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 15 to 17, when Elisha and his servant wake up one morning to find themselves stuck in a city that's surrounded by an enemy army. And in those days, this either meant, A, a long siege and likely death by starvation or surrender, whichever came first, or B, death by the sword when the enemy breached the gates. So no wonder Elisha's servant had his stomach sort of just drop at the sight that met his gaze when he looked out over the army encamped around the city. The scriptures say when the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. "Oh no, my lord, what shall we do?" the servant asked. "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked, and he saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. I love that. Psalm 34, verse 7 says, "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them." When the servant saw the tents of the enemy encamped around him, Elisha prayed that the servant would see the much greater, the much more powerful army encamped around them. Prayer isn't all we've got. It's what we've got. It's the first thing we've got. So back to Jehoshaphat, as he's facing down the armies of Ammon and Moab. He doesn't try to marshal his forces first, right? The very first thing he does as soon as he gets the news is this. It says, alarmed, Jehoshaphat resolved to inquire of the Lord, and he proclaimed a fast for all of Judah. The people of Judah came together to seek help from the Lord. Indeed, they came from every town in Judah to seek him. Then Jehoshaphat stood up in the assembly of Judah and Jerusalem at the temple of the Lord in front of the new courtyard. And what did he do? He prayed. He prayed and he prayed and he prayed. And then he ended his prayer with this petition that slices right to my core because it's exactly the cry of my own heart. "For we have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." Lord, I don't know what to do, but my eyes are on you. I listened to a message yesterday that Priscilla Shirer had given back in 2018 at a Passion conference concerning spiritual warfare, holiness, and integrity. And you guys, if you want to hear an anointed word of the Lord, listen to that one. I've linked it in my blog. Listen to it right up to the end. The Holy Spirit drove through her words and stripped away all the defensive layers that I had placed around my own heart. It was really powerful. And when I think of integrity, walking with holiness, my mind goes to Daniel, right? We used to sing a song back in Sunday school when I was a kid. Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, dare to make it known. And it struck me this morning as I was reading back through some of Daniel's story. There were a few significant facts about him. Daniel had lived in Babylon for most of his life, right? He arrived there as a young man, likely a teenager. He lived a full life there. During his time in Babylon, he worked in positions fairly close to, whoever happened to be the king. Why? Because he was valued for his wisdom. It says, to these 4 young men, Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. So please note this ability was not his ability, but the Lord gave him the interpretation, as Daniel makes clear in chapter 2, verses 27 to 28. So because of the Lord's work through Daniel's integrity and wisdom, Nebuchadnezzar, who was a pagan king, praised the one true God. Nebuchadnezzar writes, "Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal kingdom. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, 'What have you done?'" That's Daniel chapter 4, verses 34 to 35. So then years later, another king of Babylon, Darius, writes to all his people throughout the land. He says, "I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end." Does this sound familiar? He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Daniel chapter 6, verses 26 to 27. So Daniel's witness as a servant of God who lived with faithfulness and integrity in a kingdom and beneath kings who did not serve God was incredibly powerful. And what really appeals to me is this: he lived for God in the middle of the enemy's encampment. So now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. That's Daniel chapter 6, verse 3, which made the administrators and satraps jealous because they weren't getting similarly distinguished, right? So they tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so, says Daniel chapter 6, verse 4a. Do we ever find anyone involved in government affairs who does not get a thorough rifling through their past for their skeletons in their closet? But Daniel had no skeletons. His integrity kept them non-existent. Daniel 6:4b says they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. So they go back to the drawing board, right? And here's where their game plan ramps up. We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Daniel 6:5. Daniel was so well known for A, serving the king with excellence, and B, following the law of his God, that the enemy realized that they could not crack through his defenses unless they attacked his faith. So they set it all up. They went to the king, they played on his pride by asking him to issue an edict that everyone had to pray only to Darius for the next 30 days. And if anyone prayed to anyone else, they'd be tossed into a lion's den, which was apparently a common form of punishment because that lion's den was right ready to go. So let me just say, God hates pride. When Nebuchadnezzar said the words, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Can you imagine saying those words? Anyway, that's Daniel chapter 4, verse 30. The words were still on his lips when a voice came from heaven. And Nebuchadnezzar lost his mind, literally. He was driven away from his people. He ate grass like cattle. He became almost unrecognizable as his hair grew and got matted and gross and feathery, and his fingernails got super long like talons. 7 years of insanity because of his abominable pride. So here in Daniel chapter 6, Darius proudly decrees that no one can pray to anyone else except himself. And it backfires. His pet wise man, his good friend Daniel, gets caught in the crosshairs. Why? Because Daniel didn't back down. The new law went against the law of his God, and he chose to follow the law of his God over the law of men. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where his windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. Nothing changed in his walk with God. No satraps, no new laws, no threat of a lion's den, right? Just as he had done before. So in Daniel 6:11, then these men went as a group, and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So it followed that the king had to do what he'd said, right? And oh, how quickly Darius realized where his pride had led him and how deep was his regret. But actions bring consequences, don't they? And even Darius couldn't change the unchangeable law that he'd himself put into place. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and they threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Daniel chapter 6, verse 16. And Daniel spent the night surrounded by hungry lions who didn't dare to break through the horses and chariots of fire around the Lord's servant. How do I know? Look back up at 2 Kings 6, 15 to 17, then look back at Psalm 34, verse 7. Daniel had made a deep, deep, deep impression on Darius because at the first light of dawn, the king got up and he hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God." Pagan king recognizes true God, right? "Has your God whom you serve continually?" That's a repeated phrase from yesterday. He'd been thinking about this all night long. "Has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel chapter 6, verse 20. And Daniel's voice emerged from the den. He said, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." Daniel 6:22. Integrity. No wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. Daniel 6:23. So, Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1, "As a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received." That's the NIV. The NRSV says, "I beg you." The NASB says, "I implore you." The KJV says, "I beseech you." Do you think we're supposed to live our lives with integrity, with holiness? Daniel lived his faith out loud. He was known for living with holiness. He was known for the one whom he served. How can I live my faith out loud? When you see the enemy encamped around you, open your eyes and see the hills full of horses and chariots of fire of heaven. When you see the enemy coming, approaching the Father in prayer isn't all you've got. It's what you've got. It's the first thing you've got. When it feels like the world is closing in around you, when your satrap buddies are coming for you, when you hear the lions roaring, when you don't know what to do, get your eyes on the Father. Fling open the windows, get on your knees just as you have done before, and live out loud. That was good. This is what I had for today. I will not be doing a video tomorrow because I will be out of town and then kind of throughout the weekend. But I will be continuing to post my blog reflections every day as I've been doing so far. Anyway, so I will see you again on Monday on the blog, but tomorrow on the video, and tomorrow on the blog if you read that. All right, I'll see you then.